Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Interfaith Paths to Peace. This is our Wednesday afternoon program time where we're doing a variety of different kinds of conversations. And we are launching today a monthly program on men's work, specifically kind of men's inner work, and trying to look at what is the specific work that men or those who identify with as being a man, which we may even get into a conversation about what is it when we say being a man. So I'm going to welcome you to a monthly conversation. We're going to kick off our conversation with three panelists that I really appreciate their work in this space, their wisdom in this space, and we want to open that up. So if you're joining us on Facebook, you're welcome to add a chat in the conversation, the chat box, and we will bring in your question or conversation into our discussion. If you're a woman, you're also welcome to listen in. In fact, I would be really interested if you have thoughts or questions that arise for you as we're having conversation. Feel free to put those in the chat box and engage us in conversation. So I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for giving a little time and energy to looking at men's work. Where are we now and where are we headed in the future? So welcome, gentlemen. I want to introduce and have them introduce themselves. We have Russ Funk, Richard Whitaker, and Peter Bucher, who are going to be our panelists. And we've got some questions that we're going to kind of explore, but we'll look forward to seeing how the conversation shifts and changes as we talk. So if we could start, Russ, if you wouldn't mind, and I'll ask each of you to just introduce yourself a little bit, share about the work that you do, and a little bit about your history with men's work, and then we'll jump into some questions. Welcome, Russ. Thanks for being here and giving us some time.
Well, thank you, Jud. I appreciate the invite to be a part of this, and to Peter and Richard, I look forward to being in conversation with you all and everybody else. I don't know that I've met Peter or Richard before, so nice to virtually meet you too. I have been doing various forms of men's work, both and personally and as a part of my activism and professionally for more than 30 years. As a professional, I'm a trained social worker, and I graduated from Howard University, go Bison, in Washington, D.C. And right out of graduate school, I jumped into doing men's work by helping to launch a program in East Baltimore with young men who have been sexually assaulted and with adolescent and adult men who perpetrated sexual assault or sexual abuse. So really kind of initially as a 20-something-year-old male-identified therapist type person coming into the work, that was kind of my entree point. And as I have emerged over the years in this work, I started to shift my focus from doing the therapeutic work to doing more social organizing and social activism. Largely because so much of what I see as the issues and the difficulties that men face are in the context of gender equality and racial equality. And so the need to work with men at this point in my inner work right now as a man is very much within the context of efforts for gender and racial equality. But like gender and racial equality, so many of the barriers to men's health and well-being are not within individual men, but within the social context. And the barriers that are created for men in terms of being the well and healthy human beings that many of us are striving to be. And so my current focus is on how do we shift the social environments that men exist in that actually support men to be healthy, well human beings, more than working with individual men about how they exist in this environment. The analogy I work is that we live in a racist, misogynistic. We all swim in a racist, misogynistic sea, and that racism and that misogyny impacts on men differently than it does on women or on Black and brown folks, but it impacts on men as well. And teaching men to swim differently within the sea does some value. There's value in teaching my son how to do a front stroke or a breaststroke or a backstroke in order for him to be able to swim through the sea. But when you swim in an ocean, you swallow some of the seawater. And if the water that we have for our children to swim in is racist, misogynistic water, then they're going to swallow some of the racism and misogyny. And we got to clean up the water at the same time that we're teaching our children how to swim in it. So that's kind of how I understand my work right now, is both teaching men how do they swim in this ocean and how do we clean up the damn ocean.
Oh, thanks, Russ. Look forward to engaging that some more. Richard, introduce yourself a little bit, and thanks for being on the panel.
Thank you as well. My name is Richard Whitlock. I'm 37 years old. I'm the creator and the CEO of the GAP Felony Prevention Program. When it comes to men's work, I'm actually a product of a men's organization that was called Brothers Helping Brothers. In 2010, I got married and I didn't know any married men. And someone at the barbershop told me about a men's group. And I went there and actually I tell people I didn't become a man until I got married, but that men's group was actually part of that process as well. Just having a group of men to strengthen, encourage, and comfort me, and me getting involved in the community has made all the difference in my life. Mm-hmm. And what the GAP Felony Prevention Program, it wasn't always that. At first, it was just a positive Black male identity program. I noticed these things in media. Later on, I would find out things, social facts that come out of institutions, the way we view each other. Even being part of the men's group, Brothers Helping Brothers, I started looking at my neighbors as brothers, and that's made all the difference in my life. Before that, I can honestly say I didn't look at everybody as my brother. But being part of that men's group helped me identify everybody as my brother and as my sisters. And it just changed my worldview. And I just really, that's why I'm so big on youth when it comes to them developing the identity. And something I shared earlier in the week is that criminality is more about identity than it is crime. And, you know, you hear a lot of people talk about the crime issue in our community, but there's a cultural identity attached to gangbanging. There's a cultural identity attached to drug dealing. There's a cultural identity attached to criminality in our community. And the best way I can really explain it, and, you know, like we're dealing with racial equity, inclusion, and diversity now. Imagine being part of a system that you know it's against you. So you going against that system in the form of mathematics, subtracting a negative is a positive. And that's what I don't think, that component, I think a lot of people have missed that out. Imagine you was born in a country and part of these social constructs that you have no doubt in your mind, your family doesn't have any doubt in their mind, your community doesn't have any doubt in your mind that these systems are against it. Going against it is actually positive.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, and I really look forward to having some more conversation about men's work related to race and the intersection of those. So thanks for being on. Look forward to that conversation. Peter, thanks for being here. Introduce yourself a little bit more and the work that you do in this space.
Thanks for having me. My name is Pete Bucher. I am a now retired orthopedic surgeon. I practiced for 15 years and increasingly stepped away from that space to do more deep human work with people. And healing work with people. So what that looks like, that has looked like over the past several years, what that looks like today are a little different, but basically I look more at the what I'll refer to as the deeper spiritual approaches. How do we get in touch with the truth of who we are versus the ideas of who we are in sort of the ramifications of identifying with the ego constructs that come from a number of places, our early childhood upbringing, early childhood experiences, familial and social contexts, and basically the stories, the narrative that we create about ourselves versus the truth of who we are inside, and how do we get people living more comfortably in their own skin. And I've done that work with women and men. I have not had the opportunity to do that work with any transgendered individuals, but with people across the across sexual orientations, but as men and women, and there's just some differences in the narratives and the stories that we tell ourselves that block us from our sort of our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And with men, I see just constantly, and it may be just the sample of men that I have had the opportunity to work with, but men really struggle a lot with, for instance, concepts of worth. What is it that gives me worth as a human? And for a lot of men, it comes down to, what can I provide? What do I do? How can I identify? And whereas with women, it's a little bit different. And so, and again, that's a broad stroke. It's just what I've seen as a trend. So it's really helping men find value in themselves as a human first. And then, then how does that affect my roles in life as a partner, as a father, as a, what I do in life professionally or in the community or whatever that may be. So, so that's kind of the approach I take with that. I think to your question here in the chat box about women need space for rage and men need space for grief, it really is such a powerful observation, because what I see, for instance, a lot of men come to me because they have problems with anger, or they have problems with feeling stressed or overwhelmed or just lost. But when we go to the deeper layer of that, what's there is this deep layer of grief and sadness from things that have happened in life and trauma that's been incurred, or just never feeling truly loved or appreciated, or feeling like they've just been driven by their fathers, or by a lot of them by their fathers, or maybe the absence of a father. And so there's just this deep sense of loss that's at the source of that. So uncovering that and helping men sort of heal that and transform their sort of emotional being by really looking at that very honestly has just been very powerful. So that's kind of what it's turned into today. I guess we'll see how it transitions, but it's been really a fascinating journey.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, and thanks each of you for the space that you've been holding in that work. I do want to get into some of these, and I do want to state at the beginning, I was a little hesitant to even call something men's work these days, because, I'm not trying to buy into the binaries. Definitely see sexual identity, gender identity on spectrums. And so, although I do think it's at times important that we do work in these specific sectors. And so, again, I want to state at the beginning that I'm open to all of those ways in which people identify, and not box that up too much, while also trying to be attentive to dynamics that we feel that come along with identifying as a man. Let's jump in, Peter. I want to jump in since you went ahead and started. We have been having some conversations online, and there was this comment that came up that women need space for their rage and men need space for their grief. And when I heard that said, like, it just deeply, I almost got emotional hearing it, because I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I need space for my grief. And I don't know always how to show that or where to show that. So let's talk a little more about that. Yeah, what do we think, what's going on there that we need space for our grief? And, we can look at that personally, or, and Russ, as you've said, we can look at that structurally or culturally. Any more reflections you all have on that? Let's go a little bit deeper there.
Yeah, I mean, I would just kind of echo, I guess maybe take what I said a little bit further, and that is that is sort of looking at how do we become, I kind of go back to the beginning. How do I become who I am? Like, a lot of this, of course, came from my own journey, right? I got to some point in my life where I'd chased this whole career path. That's all I ever wanted to do. And then I got there and kind of my life was going down in flames around me. I didn't know why. And then I had to really start looking in the mirror and going, okay, well, the only thing that connects all these things that are going badly in my life is me. So what is it that I need to really look at? And so kind of going back to the beginning, it's like, where is it that I sort of split off from knowing who I am and then going into this identities and roles and gender or sexual roles or whatever it may be. And remember reading a book by a guy named Eli Jackson Bear called Sudden Awakening. And in that book, he talks about the initial wounding as being sort of the root of the ego. And the initial wounding is this first sort of integrated thought or belief that there's something wrong with me. So in other words, if I'm being traumatized, if my parents aren't, showing me love, as a little kid, I'm egocentric. And so I just assume that there's a problem with me. It's too scary I think, to imagine that there's something wrong with the adults or the people who I'm looking to for guidance. So what's wrong with me, and how do I fix myself to be more acceptable or to experience less trauma? And so the initial wounding, but then that sort of develops and then you have this, to this question, then you have this intense emotional reaction to that, which is some version of sad, mad, or scared. And then we carry that as our sort of emotional core, and everything else starts to sort of derive from that into our daily experiences, into our mental health, our emotional health, or how we engage relationships, all this stuff. But the reality is that we don't have sort of one initial wounding. And I sort of think of it now as sort of three primary wounds that we carry. We have usually a maternal wound, and we have a paternal wound, either because of something a father did, or there was an absence of a father, or father left the family. There's all kinds of versions of paternal wounds, maternal wounds. And then I think there's a third one, which is societal wounds. Like, what do we carry that are expectations of what it means to be a man, or to be a white man, or to be a black man, or to be whatever. And so we carry these wounds with us, and they very much drive everything we do until we really bring true awareness to them and start figuring out, well, how can I resolve these so that I can actually live a life that feels peaceful inside my own skin, where I can really be skillful, and I can maybe even at some point sort of become a lighthouse for other people, who are still lost in the dark to come to. And I think, everyone on here is probably one of those people, right? We're trying our best to not only find something in ourselves, but to be an example for other people in some way. But I think what happens is then that, particularly in that familial or in those societal wounds, there's all these messages about what's appropriate. So, we have all these things in our society about boys don't cry. We don't show weakness. We have to be tough. You have to, soldier up or sack up or whatever. We have all these terms, which basically just sort of cuts off this important part of our emotional being from expression. And then we convert that deep sadness, that deep grief, if that's what we're carrying, into other more socially acceptable forms of emotion, like anger. And then I think with women, it's just a different thing. And again, I see this with the clients I work with. It's much more appropriate for women to feel anxious or to feel sad than it is to feel anger and to express anger openly. And we have all these societal constructs around that. So I really think that this goes back to that core is, what is it that you're trying to solve? What is that early life wound maybe that you're trying to solve? And how does that affect the totality of your emotional expression? I think it's a huge, huge deal. It's a long answer, but that's hopefully maybe set some context for the discussion.
No, it does. That's helpful. Richard or Russ, what comes up for you in that?
Well, what I see is grief and rage being almost synonymous. More like rage would be outward and grief would be inward. I think a lot of people that are grieving, they're actually raging against themselves, feeling like what they could have done, what they should have done. And I just see that as an inward kind of rage, enrage instead of outrage. Mm-hmm. So what I heard is women need to get it out, and men need to find a place to get it in, right? And those places are not really. I don't see a place like I see places where men can rage. I see sports. I see wrestling. I see boxing. I see football. I see places where men are able to rage and it's socially acceptable. I don't see places where women are able to rage in our society and it's socially acceptable. When it comes to grief, and I think this is one of the saddest things in our society, male or female, when it comes to grief, you're on your own. Outside of a therapist, it's like we pay taxes. We believe in a community. We believe in a society. we believe in that of what our country's doing. But then when the personal grieving is a personal thing, people act like, hey, that's not society's challenge. Hey, you have to learn how to cope with this. You have to learn how to deal with it. It made me think about racism. And I remember a job I had in my early 20s, and the people that were running, I'm not going to say the name of the organization, but the people that were running it, they were from Alabama. And I told them about some of the people they had from Eastern Kentucky and that they were kind of racist. And the organization said, hey, man, racism is something you have to deal with. And I said, I can deal with it as long as you do something about it. I can't just deal with it without you doing anything about it, because you're part of the administration. And, just for 2020, for all this to be going on, I don't think that organization will respond the same now. As this racism thing is just something you have to deal with. It's part of the American reality, and you being treated different with this company in this country because you're a black man is something you have to do. You have to deal with that grief on your own. And that's why I'm so excited about what's going on in 2020. Is not only are people being humanized, you also said, you say, hey, I understand that frustration. I understand the grief. I understand where this rage is coming from. And that's what I think's been missing for a lot of years is a national and a cultural understanding of the challenges that have faced African Americans and men. So not only am I a man, I'm also an African American man. So I definitely have to make sure I represent that perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
Thank you both.
Russ?
I guess for me, one, I would challenge the notion that men need space for their grief. I think the men need a space for a whole lot more than grief. As Peter demonstrated or suggested, the emotion that men are allowed and supported to express is anger. And the way that a real man expresses anger is usually some form of violence, whether appropriate or not, but violence is the way that a real man expresses violence. The way I was raised, I grew up in Texas, the way I was raised was, boy, if you're that mad, there's plenty of wood out there to go chop, right? Which in some ways is a productive activity, but taking an axe and slamming it into wood and saying the things I was saying in some of those temper tantrums, that was violent.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be clear, right? And I got no tools. And my dad's a social worker. I got no tools growing up around how to be angry in anything other than a violent way. And no tools around my fear, my grief, my anxiety, my confusion, none of the other emotions that make us human. So not only do I think we need room for our grief, I think we need room for a space for feeling all of the stuff that makes us human. And an understanding that everything in our society teaches men that the only supports and encourages and rewards men for expressing all of their emotions only through anger, and actually punishes men for expressing any of these other dynamics, any of these other emotions. And I think it gets, one of the questions that I want to ask whenever we ask these questions about men or women is another question is around which men. So I think as a white man, I have a whole different kind of privilege to and more space, especially as an older white man. I got more space to express some of those feelings than black or brown men do, than poor men do, than trans men do. And I think that's an important kind of complexity and nuance to pay attention to. And I also think another dynamic here is the way men are shamed around feeling any of these other expressions, any of these other emotions, or expressing any of those emotions. So, and there's, and Peter, I think you kind of got to it in some of what you were talking about, but there's this, in addition to being blocked from the feelings, we've been shamed around having those feelings. Because of course we had them when we were 7 or 9. We expressed them when we were 12 or 14. And we were shamed for expressing them. And I think that's as much a part of the what men need to have space to feel and express as is the grief. In fact, the shame may be a bigger chunk of what it is that men need space to experience and express.
Yeah, I think that for me, that's the underlying issue on both, right? That's that when women need space for rage and men need space for grief, what are we raging and grieving over? And so many times it's that shame, it's that sort of institutionalized or contextualized shame that we receive through generations of family, dysfunction, through trauma, through societal messaging, is such a toxic element of that's so tightly woven in our society that we don't even see it. Like, it's just so densely woven in everything that we do, in the way that we receive messages on TV, in the way that we talk to each other, in the way that we deal with each other around social issues, around our politics, our political messaging. So much of it is shame-based, and it's just crazy making. So that's a great observation, Russ.
I would say I want to push back on the framing of this as dysfunctional, because from the way I look at the world and the way I look at these dynamics, it's functioned exactly the way it was intended to. Our society was created exactly to have white people dominant over black and brown people, to have men in a dominant role over women and girls. And one of the ways we do that is limit men's emotion to anger. So that's functioned exactly the way it was designed to function. And so it has dysfunctional results, because I can't be a healthy human being if I play that game. But the game is doing exactly the way it was designed. And I think that's part of the complexity of what we have to push back against is how do we define the illegitimacy of a system that has been legitimized for generations.
Thank you all. Those of you that are just joining us on Facebook, you're welcome to add a thought or a question as we continue. We'll come back to that. Again, we're talking about men's work and interviewing Russ Funk, Peter Bucher, and Richard Whitlock. So thanks for joining, and we'll have a chance for everybody to join in the conversation in a minute. So are there other issues that we've talked about grief, shame? What do you all see as some of the future work of men's work? So, men's work's been around. It's had a variety of different kind of iterations. I've been in a lot of those iterations in my own journey of, what's the work that we're being invited to do in the containers. What are some other, I guess that's kind of two questions, but yeah, what are the other issues, and what's the future of men's work, do you think, that we need to be looking at and creating? Anybody?
What I would say, and I'm gonna keep it in the context that I know, which is being an African American, a black man. Black men really redefining themselves, and what is a black man supposed to do in a community like the West End? Is the only thing he's supposed to do is wake up, go to work, take care of his family, and hope none of the bullets hit his home? Is he supposed to be on the porch, making sure he see the vehicle of the drive-by? Is he supposed to network with the kids in the community, so he'll know these kids before something negative happens to them or before they do something negative to somebody else? Does he start an organization? Does he go volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club, for example? Does he make sure he's active in the YMCA? And those are the things. I see a lot of people talking about repair and restoring West Louisville, for example, our black communities, right? But I also see a redefining of what it is to be a black man in the 21st century, and how the 21st century, especially with this movement, the 21st century black man, he's gonna have to have not only be focused on his family and focus on himself. It'd be a shame if he isn't focused on his community. What I've really noticed is that community portion has been optional, especially in the African American community. Hey, man, only thing I have to do as a man is I have to take care of myself and I have to take care of my family. But when you live in a community that's traumatic as West Louisville, you know that that's not enough. Only thing you're going to be left is praying and hoping nothing negative happens to your children, right? And that's the way things have been historically done. Like women are really challenging men, saying, hey, y'all need to do something about this violence. Because people don't feel safe in the community. And I really think safety has always been a male function. Like, hey, a man's going to help us be safe if there's any kind of physical danger, right? And that's the way it historically has been. And a lot of men are really starting to step up and say, hey, you know what? I may not be able to provide because of social economic situations, but what I can do, I can protect. And that's what I really see, you know, one of the questions saying, hey, where is men's work leading? Even the Nation of Islam, a couple years ago, they wanted to start something called 10,000, the 10,000, right? And they were trying to mobilize 10,000 Black men nationwide to say, hey, we're going to make sure our community's safer. Because to me, all these other things, if you don't have safety of body, you're not going to be able to value a whole lot of other things. If you don't think you're going to live past 24 hours, if you don't think you're going to live past the next month, if you don't think you're going to be alive in the next 5 years. And so me personally, I really see the redefining of Black men as not only, you know, you got these guys that make the news that are criminals, but also the good guys being not in opposition with them, but definitely in opposition of what they're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Other responses?
I really liked, Richard, a lot of what you said, but a couple of pieces that struck me that I'm translating in my own language was this idea of how self-care and collective care is connected. I mean, there's another binary that we created, right? That the way I was raised in terms of the self-care model is I go for a walk by myself, or I take a hot bath by myself, or I do some meditation by myself. And self-care is always focused on me, which leads me, because of who I am and my own flaws, that leads me to selfishness and self-servingness, which is not self-care. And so my best self-care is actually getting out of myself and helping others and working in my community. And kind of related to that, one of the things that I think, again, thinking about the which men question, one of the things that I think we need to think about really carefully as we think about this idea of self-care, self and collective care connected, is who is my collective? So I remember when Brother Help Thyself came to Louisville and was starting to be a thing and started to take movement. And one of the things that as a white man I noticed is that it looked like this thing for Black men, and how Black men can help each other and support each other. And it gave white men escape. It's like, okay, I got no responsibility for helping Black men get themselves together. Yes, I do. Because my people is what created the redlining and the criminal justice system that punishes Black men differently than white men, that my people create the dynamics that Black men now have to figure out how to help themselves. So I absolutely have a responsibility to join in and figure out how do I, as a white man, help the brothers help themselves. Mm-hmm. Not to take over, not in a paternalistic or overbearing way, but what is my role to support the other brothers to helping themselves? And what we have, not only the gender binary, but all of the binaries we got that are rolling around in our society right now, means that my work is with white men. And yes, it is. And it's around how do I help white men step up and support Black and brown men? That's part of redefining masculinity. And I think the other piece that really struck me, Richard, from what you said, was around this whole notion of, to me, one of the ongoing and future work is redefining what it means to be a man. And really zoning in that we are human beings first. We are humans first. And all of this notion of manhood, Black manhood, brown manhood, white manhood, old manhood, young manhood, all of those other manhoods are social constructs. And to a large degree, they're false and they're artificial and they're hurtful. How am I a human first and get to express my humanity first before needing to kind of figure out how do I fit into these constrictions of being a man that hurt other people more than they hurt me? I got an 11-year-old son, and he goes to public school right now. It's virtually, but he goes to public school, and we are working really hard to support him to hold on to his gentleness and his kindness and his sensitivity and his compassion. And he's going to public school. And our system right now works really hard to beat the gentleness and the kindness and the sensitivity out of our 11, 12-year-old boys, right? Mm-hmm. He's going to get his ass kicked on a daily, going to the playground, going on the bus, walking the streets, being sensitive, sweet, and kind. And so as important as it is that I teach him those skills, I also got to work on the streets and in the schools to make sure that my son and every son is safe in those environments to be his sweet, kind, gentle, sensitive self, and being willing and able to show up in those spaces. And right now, since school is such a predominant place for 11, 12-year-old, 13-year-old boys, that's where the work has to be. How do we create our schools that allow children to show up, whatever their gender or gender identity, show up being sweet, compassionate, caring, and attentive to each other? That's the next, in my mind, that's the future of the work of so-called men's work.
Yeah, thank you. Peter,
I think, well, for me, the thing I've just observed, and Richard hit on it and Russ already expanded on it, but it's just building communities of support. The idea of because men, as we get into all these things that we do, right, providing for the family, working harder, doing more, we tend to pull back, we tend to isolate, we tend to get, focused into these sort of silos in which we function. And then what we see across the spectrum is that, men are increasingly having a lot of problems with mental health, with depression, with addiction, with suicidality. And so much of that has to do with, I think, with just isolation. And that doesn't know boundaries of color, of economic fortitude or whatever. It's everywhere. And so I think it's how do we normalize the experiences? How do we bring people into community? How do we at least give people access to support to say, look, it's okay. It's all right. It's okay to feel like you don't know what to do. It's okay to feel down. It's okay to, to be whatever. And then provide those safe places, those soft, safe places for men to land when things are tough. And I think that's such a missing element in our society as a whole, because frankly, the mental health system just doesn't serve a lot of men well. It's a really lost group in that system. And so how can we provide alternatives that are soft, safe places for men to land when they need something, and then to support them, on an ongoing basis, their mental, their emotional health, their spiritual health. And I think in doing that, if done thoughtfully, creates the space for the conversations that Russ and that Richard bring up. It's like, how do we then look at ourselves as human? How do we accept ourselves wholly as we are? And that then allows us then to, and this has been taught in spiritual traditions throughout time, that as I come into a more truthful understanding of myself, I then almost naturally, but if not, then it's a much easier lift to start looking at other people in their truth as well, and accepting people in their truth as well, and then cultivating these states of compassion, of acceptance, of truthful awareness of, oh my gosh, and being able to look at other communities of people with very different and fresh eyes. And so I think we start to, I don't know, I just feel like if we create these systems of support now, all of a sudden a lot of these other conversations start to arise naturally or with intention, as opposed to just sort of being lost in the shuffle.
Mm-hmm.
And I also would like to add, Jud, that especially the conditions that I talk about in ghetto environments and Black communities, that 95% of people that are diagnosed with depression are women. And in most Black communities throughout the country, they exist in great depression conditions for 50 years. So what was going on in the 1930s in this country has been going on since the 1960s or 70s in the Black community economically. So we're talking about 95% of people that I consider depressed are women, and in a community, almost a majority of the masses of Black people have lived in a economic depression for their entire existence. And I don't think people put that in. I don't think people can even wrap up their minds around that. So when you hear people saying, let's make America great again, you hear some people say, well, America's never been great, because their entire existence, our entire existence, has been in Great Depression economic conditions from birth to death. And I don't think people that haven't experienced it, they have no idea how they can wrap their minds around this, what I call the Black economy, what's going on in Black neighborhoods and the economics the economical dynamic in Black neighborhoods, where the drug dealers are the CEOs, man. The drug dealers are the CEOs in this community. And that's what, like, so when I talk to a white man, for example, that's a businessman, what he doesn't know is, if I wanted to be him, I would be a drug dealer, because that's the biggest market of what was in his white world. The biggest market in my Black world was being a drug dealer.
Mm-hmm. So I want to, again, those that are joining us on Facebook, you're welcome to add a question or comment, and we'll bring that into the conversation. I do want to open it up to see at this point if anybody on Zoom's got a comment or reflection. Robin, you're also welcome to join if you have a comment or a question or a reflection. So just unmute yourself and join in.
I'm thinking of a lot of things, but at the moment I'm unemployed and I could afford my therapist, but I don't have my insurance anymore. I mean, I have some interviews, I'm not too worried about it, but I'm thinking, like, for unemployed people, working poor, uninsured people, men and women that are depressed or that may be anxious or whatever, you know, like, I was just thinking, you know, therapy is not really, therapy is for people that have insurance, and it's for people that are employed, but the people that need therapy the most are the people that can't really afford it. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering why there weren't more volunteer therapists. I mean, I have a CSW, so I kind of understand why people want to get paid and, you know, don't want to be a volunteer therapist. But I was just wondering if there was maybe some way we could encourage therapists to donate some of their time, like maybe lawyers donate some of their time for pro bono work. Maybe therapists could, and I guess some of them are on a sliding scale. Maybe they have that. I don't know. Some do. Yeah. But I was just wondering what your all's thoughts were on that.
Yeah, and I think that question around community support, what are the structures around that that aren't, you know, that are different than just therapeutic or, you know, paying for those kinds of things, but what are the larger structures around creating spaces for grief and sharing and affiliation? Russ, did you have a specific something you wanted to say?
Well, yeah. One of the things that I learned recently is that in the East End, which includes where I live in the Highlands, the ratio of therapist to person is about 1 to 40. In the West End, it's 1 to 700 in Louisville. And so I think, Robin, to your point around accessibility, it's where do our therapists go to hang out their shingles and why? And I think that's a really hard question that we need to ask. The other point that I really, again, resonated with me with some of what Richard was saying is that, you know, we tend to pathologize the individuals who have some of the struggles that we're having. So as Richard, you know, stated really clearly, being depressed when you live in a depressing environment isn't a pathology. It's normal. It's actually probably a healthy response to the environment that we've created for folks in the West End. If we create and sustain a depressing environment, then of course the people are going to be depressed. The problem is not them and the fact that they're suffering from depression. The problem is the environment and the society that we created. Mm-hmm. And yes, we need to provide support, meaningful support for them to manage in a depressing environment, but we also need to clean up the environment. Whether that's the toxic environment in terms of Rubber Town or the different kind of toxicity of unrelenting, constant, enduring racism and economic oppression. It's got to be both and. The other part that I thought, kind of bouncing off what Peter said, is that one of the challenges that I think is really important, particularly for me with white men, is not only creating a safe space, but creating a brave space. And by that, I mean creating a space where men can show up with their warts and know that I'm not necessarily going to make it okay for you to have your warts because some of your warts hurt people. It's based kind of on my experience of working with men who perpetrated violence against their partners. It's not okay for you to be a perpetrator of violence. I want you to show up with all of yourself, which means showing up, creating enough of a space that part of my job is for you to be accountable. and support you to be accountable for the fact that you caused harm to the person that you claim to love. Deep, deep harm. And so that's not necessarily soft. Sometimes it's firm. Sometimes it's a lot of other things, but it is an opening and a welcoming space around, I need you to show up with all of you, which means your warts too, which I have to start by showing up with my warts, my own self. I can't expect you to show up in a way that I'm not willing to. So I gotta practice being brave with my flaws fully engaged, with my warts purely exposed, if I expect the men that I'm with to show up in that similar kind of way, so that we can talk about and soften up the warts and address the flaws.
I want to open it up to see if there's anybody else that has a comment that's joining us on Zoom, has a comment or a question or wants to join in the conversation in any way. Greg?
I want to say thank you. Just Monday, in a conversation with Jud and a few other people, I raised the problem that men generally are stewed, canned, packed, labeled, you know, and put on in categories by the time we're 11. And it is, it reflects that toxic culture that Russ has been talking about. Peter, all of you, the distinctions that you're looking at and articulating are very helpful, very helpful. I also want to just add from my personal experience that rage and depression, it's really hard to get a can opener on that when you're in the middle of it. And for me, it took a great loss, like a spear just breaking through every defense I had, until I literally felt that my bones were broken and I could hold nothing. And it wasn't until much later that I asked myself the tough question, if you knew this is how it was going to end, would you not have done it? And I had to say, well, hell no. I've had some of the most wonderful moments of my life. And it was that moment of gratitude that finally allowed me to start turning. And I've been doing it ever since. And that's why I'm here today. I think this is really timely, relevant, and necessary. Thank you all for coming.
No, thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your experience. And I want to turn. We've been focusing on I want to kind of turn an appreciative inquiry, a different way of what is working or what's worked, what's been helpful for you, what are resources, what's been meaningful in your journey, what is out there that can help us, what have been your experiences that have helped you through these things. So let's do a little appreciative inquiry around what's there, what's available, what our experiences have been.
I mean, I can just speak for myself. The real turning point for me was finding another man that held space for me, that held non-judgmental, loving space for me, and allowed me to air, you know, my concerns, my hurt, my you know, to expose my warts, as Russ said, in an environment where I knew I wouldn't be judged, but I would be held accountable. And I think again, it's a brilliant insight to say, yeah, we know where our warts are. We're not proud of them, you know, but also this sort of the stigmatization of being able to air them out, to talk about them, and to heal. You know, it's like we're sort of once you're in to Greg's comment, once you're sort of in this, once you're stewed, canned, and in the, you know, and packaged and labeled, it's very hard I think it's for any human, but I can only speak from my own perspective as a man and the people I work with. As a man, it's very hard to turn ship and say, you know what, I've been a real dick. I need to clean up my act and get together. It's much easier to continue going down the rabbit hole and being defiant about it, because that's where you feel like you have to be once you're there. So I think, again, I go back to community, but honestly, a community of two people. It just you need to have, I think, just for men to have, again, a place they know they can turn, where they're accepted and they're in a non-judgmental and loving way, but also held to account to make the changes that are needed, and then given the resources to do that. For me, just having someone else, there that I knew I could turn to made all the difference.
Yeah, thank you.
And what I would say is having a mentor. And everyone sees the mentor relationship as a mentor-protege relationship, right? Mm-hmm. But I've always seen it as a mentor can help you with your tormentors. A mentor can help you with your tormentors. And what I mean by that, one of my favorite quotes is, they said, your friends are God's apology for your family, right? Basically saying you wouldn't have that friend if somebody in your family was that person. You wouldn't have to look outside your own family to have that person as a friend, right? And I really see mentors the same way. Mentors help you with your tormentors. They help they help guide you. And instead of taking all this stuff on by yourself, let's say at night, your mentor is just the lights. People think your mentor is the engine. Your mentor is more important than what you are. Not knowing that somebody that can help you see things you can't see, that's always mentorship. But anybody that's breaking out your lights is a tormentor. So not only do mentors help you identify positive and healthy and unhealthy relationships, but they also, what I'm really trying to say is that one person, one man loving you can help you love all men. One woman loving you can help. It's like a person has to break that spell for it to be real. And I don't think a lot of people really understand that that we are under certain spells in our society. And until we confront the spells and somebody else can break it, but do we want that spell that we're under to actually be broken?
Yeah. Other thoughts, Russ?
Well, I just kind of want to take a minute and appreciate what's been shared. That was really deep from both of y'all, so thank you. I just want to kind of hold that for a minute before I immediately go into my head, and I want to sit in my heart with what y'all just gave us. So thank you. I think one of the things that emerged, to answer the question first, for me, it was actually Black and brown women that first brought me into that was where the switch started to happen. And Black and brown women who were loving enough to hold me accountable. And a lot of times it was hard. I think Mr. G is what your identity is, talked about the spear through the armor. They didn't play. As I was 21, 22, just coming into this work in a kind of real way, they weren't playing. But they were also really clear in their hardness that they're going to love me through the crap that I was laying out. And they really believed that there was something inside me that I didn't even see that was enough to get at and get through and crack through the shell of isolation and defensiveness that I had created. For me, one of the lessons along the way was I was raised to be a perfectionist. And I think a lot of us as male type human beings were, and both in terms of the sports that I played and in terms of my home. And that had implications around all of my life. If I was going to be an activist, I had to be the perfect activist or I wasn't going to try. If I was going to be a sports person, I had to be perfect or it wasn't worth it. If I was going to be a husband, I'm going to be the perfect husband. If I'm going to be a dad. And of course, I'm not perfect. And so what do I do when the fact that I fail? At every one of those, if the measure is perfection, I fall short. And my response was to go to shame. until I started practicing, until I fully understood that practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes progress.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can keep my goal is to keep making progress, not to strive for perfection, to make progress. Can I be a better daddy today than I was yesterday? Can I be a better partner today than I was yesterday? Can I be a better white ally than I was yesterday? That's the goal. Can I be more human today than I was yesterday? That is all of a sudden much more accessible to me than this notion of what it means to be the ally or the parent or the enlightened one. I can't achieve that because my own internalized tormentors, thank you, Richard, my own internalized tormentors get in the way of my ability to be who I want to be. And the other thought that came up to mind, I heard somebody else say, and I wish I could attribute it appropriately, but I can't. But he said, when we talk about this today, that we've done such a good job of teaching men not to feel their own pain and not to express your own pain. And this colleague said, and so how do we expect men to be compassionate and empathetic to other people's pain if they can't feel their own? And that was such a deep, resounding yes from me, is, you know, if we're trying to get men to be responsive and caring and attentive, then the first step is we got to make room for men to feel their own and be able to express it.
Mm-hmm. So I want to begin to move towards some closure. And one of the things I really like to do on these calls is just give everybody a chance to name what's been meaningful or insightful. What's coming up for you in this conversation? And I'd like to give everybody on the Zoom call, if anybody on Facebook Live wants to make a comment, feel free to do that in the chat box. But let's begin to close out. But I'd like to start with maybe going back through, you know, Rhodey and Jeff and Robin, Greg, if you guys want to check out, and that's just kind of a way of us talking about what's been meaningful, what's coming up for us, and we can continue that conversation just a little bit. But Rhodey, would you like to check out?
I'll jump in. Yes, it's become so clear to me that how lethal men's isolation is. Lethal to our humanity, and of course, I would say lethal to everything around us, all the things we love and are connected to. And so this men's group and sharing and being vulnerable is just crucial for us growing.
Mm-hmm. Rhodey, can I ask you a question? You're one of these men that for me is such a model of leading with their heart, your courage. Where did that, have you always had that? Where did have you done work around that? Like what, I'm just always so touched by your being touched. What's that journey been for you? If you don't mind me asking, and you know,
no,
we are on Facebook Live, so
it's just my voice showing. It's a gift. It's a gift. I mean, I would just say that my father was emotional and affectionate, and my parents loved each other deeply, and I think I grew up with a sense of pain and love in the world. My sister had cerebral palsy and was really very highly involved. And so sacrifice and love was very much the way my parents operated in the world. And, but they did not hide that. They embraced it and celebrated it.
Mm. Yeah, well, thank you for being a model of that for a lot of us, for me included. Appreciate it. Why don't we go Robin and then Jeff? Robin, you have a checkout comment or what's been meaningful and important to you?
I think I just realized I'm the only woman here.
That's quite all right. You're welcome to the conversation.
And I thought of something I think was funny, but I don't know. Like, not that I have to be funny, but I was just thinking, I'm not a man, but a lot of my best friends are men. That's actually true. And somebody was talking about male depression and just feeling that lack of meaning. And I was just talking to a male friend who's going through exactly that. And I guess I was thinking, just because I have a social work degree and he needs a therapist, but I mean, at least he has a friend who's a therapist. I feel like all my friends kind of use me as, I'm not employed as a therapist, but I feel they use me as a therapist, but maybe I'm getting off topic. But I guess what I'm getting at is any therapist out there, this is just what's on my mind, therapy. I know there's a lot more to it than that. But at the moment, I'm just thinking, if any therapists out there that have, that have time to help their friends that aren't employed or don't have a therapist, I'm sorry I keep getting on
that's
that
okay.
topic.
Yeah.
But no, y'all are awesome. You're doing great. Men all the way. Go men rock. I like the deep, thoughtful, introspective, multi-layered, societal, individual, support each other and all that stuff. I agree with y'all with that.
Thank you. Jeff, how about you?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Jud, and thank you everybody else for putting this together and for the insight. So I'll be really honest. This is the absolute first time I've ever participated in something like this. So feel a little bit vulnerable, a little bit out of my comfort zone. And what I'm primarily doing is listening and internalizing, and ultimately or just informally working on being a bit of a better human being, more present, more connected to the community, to the world, et cetera. And I guess the question I have is for someone like myself who's just beginning to explore themselves, how to be a better citizen of the world, et cetera. You mentioned basically a community, whether that's a community of one person, non-judgmental, but holding accountable, things like that. Any suggestions or recommendations? I mean, as men, we're raised to be so independent. I'm my own man, things like that. How do you begin to break down some of those barriers? Were there any recommendations for resources or steps?
Yeah, I mean, anybody else want to cover this? There are, there's some specifically men's groups, a Warrior Within, different kind of local men's groups that do small group group and weekends. Those are some resources. Russ is aware of a lot of some of that work going on.
Well, I think yes, that there's a lot of those kinds of groups around. Not as many in the Louisville area, but certainly around the country and in other places. My own experience, I tend towards organic more than pre-organized, and I think my own experience is that by and large, men really respond to other men's vulnerability. I think my own experience, and I think George kind of touched on this, not George.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
great.
blank on the name of the other panelist, but kind of touched on this in terms of, I think men know that they've been shut down from a lot of experiences and deep connections, and they miss it. And there's some really good research that demonstrates that boys' ability to have deep, intimate relationships with each other that aren't sexualized is no different than girls until about 15. And then there's a cliff that boys hit where they're not able to have that anymore. And they don't ever get a chance to do that again. There's some things that play around at the edges. Men can have buddies. We can have fraternity bros, or we can have our sports guys. But we don't have the kind of intimate relationships that we had as children, boy to boy, boy to girl, regardless of gender, that we had in the same kind of way. And we as male type people are deeply hungry for that. So I guess I say all that to say is A, get some of our names and numbers and email addresses and reach out to us, and B, practice with your friends and just say, you know what, I'd like to go a little bit deeper with this friendship. And
Mhm.
I want to kind of push myself and push you. I love your language, Jeff. I just want to be a better human being. And I don't know if I know how to do this, but I think part of the work, I also really like your analogy of being kind of at the edge of your comfort zone. And that's where that's the brave space, right? We need to be at the edge or maybe a step past our comfort zone if we're going to make the kind of progress and movement that we need to make. And so I just want to encourage you to what is it that you need to be to hold that brave space for yourself and for one or two of your friends around you. And I think any of the four of us, and I'm going to throw Rhodey in, any of the five of us would be more than willing to kind of be that friend or supporter to you to be able to do that with your other friends.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, Russ.
Yeah. Yeah, and I echo that, Jeff. I think, part of it is just reaching out to some men that we may know and, saying, hey, I'm not really sure what I'm wanting or needing here, but, do you want to go a little bit deeper? And I find that, when other men do that to me, I'm longing for it. And and I also do every once in a while men's groups, so stuff like that. We'll definitely stay in touch, Jeff. Well, we haven't been doing any of them since COVID, but maybe we need to do an online one, if nothing else. But so I want to, Greg, you got a checkout comment?
Again, thank you to the three panelists. This is really salient. This is really necessary. And I'd like to ask each of you, well, one, Jud, if there are resources that our participants want to share, I hope you could post that maybe at the Facebook link where this will be available as a video.
Yeah,
Because
good.
some of us would like to show up. And I agree. It takes a certain amount of courage and also willingness to listen. Being willing to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, and we'll put some resources in chat, and then I can copy those over. Russ has already put a couple in there. There are also some pretty good books on men's work and things like that we can include as resources. So I want to check out with our panel, and let's go in the opposite order. Let's check out with Russ, and then Richard, and then Peter.
I think that was the same order. So.
Oh, was that the same order? Is that
Yeah.
we checked in? Well, I mean, check out in opposite order. Oh, did you check in? Anyway, just go Russ,
Okay.
Richard, and Peter.
I don't know if I can articulate kind of my main takeaways. There's so much. I was scribbling notes as people were talking, so pardon me if I looked distracted as I was looking down and writing, but there was just a lot in this that I found really meaningful and moving for me. So I guess I just want to say deep gratitude to you, Jud, for hosting this. I didn't know this was part of a series that you were launching, so I'm looking forward to the rest of it and what unfolds, and really appreciated the chance to virtually meet both Richard and Peter and kind of hear more about who you all are and what y'all got going on. So thank you all.
Good, thank you. Richard?
Yeah, well, think about like really adversity is resilience. That's adversity versus resilience, and callousness, right? There's a famous poem.
We're having a little bit trouble hearing you, Richard.
You're gonna be resilient with dealing with. Okay, either you're gonna be resilient dealing with adversity. How much resilience does resilience have its limitations, and does it lead to callousness and apathy eventually if certain things don't happen within that time? And that poem actually inspired a famous movie called "A Raisin in the Sun." because that's one of the quotes in the poem by Langston Hughes called a Dream Deferred. And just being on this call today, I actually feel a little vulnerable. And I think it's a good thing that men have to have that space where they're willing to be vulnerable. So I'm like really enjoying it. Like, hey, today I was actually able to be vulnerable. Yeah, I know we're going to be on Facebook, so on and so forth. But just when you're around other men, you know, it's like you could be vulnerable because we're all vulnerable, right? So it's like you don't have to worry about being judged because you're around other men who also that we're being forced to be vulnerable right now.
Yeah. Well, I echo that, and thank you, Richard, for it just takes a few of us to go there, and then I think we all want to go there. So thank you for being one that went there. I appreciate that. Peter, we're going to leave you with the final word, which is appropriate since you guys are both in the car.
Yeah, I'm fulfilling my most important duty as a man, which is that of father. So I'm carting my kids around. But no, I think that the biggest takeaway I have in this, you know, the men's work was something I evolved into from other work I was doing, and it's just been so powerful, profound. And I think the thing I'm left with after this conversation is just I feel hopeful. Like I think there seems to be a lot of momentum in this direction. There seems to be a lot of good things happening. The right conversations are coming up, and so I'm excited. I think there's a lot of energy in this direction, and it's good. And yeah, and I'm excited. So I thank everyone for being involved, and I look forward to furthering the conversation.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for picking up your daughter.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I do want to close just a real deep bow. This is a beginning of a monthly series on men's work, and so we'll be looking at different topics. And I really appreciated the need to look at both the inner work and the social change work that I think we need to talk about. And I really appreciated the balance and the wisdom from everybody on the call, but especially a deep thanks to Richard, Peter, and Russ, and your sharing your wisdom. And so we'll go forward and share more resources in the chat box. Greg, for those of you that want to follow up on that, that'll be on the IPP Facebook page, and ultimately we'll download this and it'll be on our web page as well under a new section we're going to have called Men's Work. That you can go back and look at it or share it with people. So a deep bow to all of you. Appreciate your being on today. Those of you that joined us on Facebook, thanks very much. And I do want to remind you, tomorrow is Give for Good in Louisville, Kentucky. So we're supporting a lot of nonprofit organizations, and we sure hope you'll keep Interfaith Paths to Peace, which is a nonprofit organization, are kept alive by your donations. Feel free to keep us in mind tomorrow in your giving to the many organizations here in Louisville. So thank you all, gentlemen, and have a good, blessed rest of your day. Thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace. Yeah.